The NZ3M research project aims to give our milk industry the information required to develop new high-value foods and accurately position them in domestic and global markets. This highly complex study has been supported by major organisations across the dairy sector and the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment.
NZ3M, New Zealand Milks Mean More, was an MB-funded program from the Endeavour Fund. It was funded for 5 years, and we're looking to repeat another version of it. So we'd done work in the past where we had foods of quite different substance, so hard, soft, with the same composition. But when we fed them to a cohort, you got quite different results. And, so that told us that the way the nutrients are actually packed within a food has a lot to do with the delivery of those nutrients to the person consuming that food. So we were very interested in milk in that regard, because most people up until that point just thought milk was milk, right? And turns out that milk is not just milk. It varies quite substantially. And so we looked at different species, cow, sheep, goat and deer, and compositionally they're quite different, and they digest and get absorbed quite differently in the human. And we also were interested in what does processing do, because processing affects the nutrients and their availability. And so we looked at common processing in terms of things like homogenization, UHT, ultra high temperature, to see what effect that had. And at the end, we were able to show that depending on the animal source of the milk, or depending on the processing, you got quite different rates of digestion of all the nutrients.
Here at the Redet Institute, they are the human gastric simulator that allow us to look in a simplified or reductionist system at the effect of the milk with different processing temperature, or milk that have been used to make harder gel or softer gel. So we can see by monitoring some of the parameters in the artificial stomach, what is going on, and that allow us to, postulate what our research questions are for in vivo human study. But because it's a reductionist model, it doesn't have all the bell and whistle that we have, then sometimes the results quite often don't agree. But in the case of NZ3M, I think there were quite a bit of work that we did as a team to try to tease out the parameter to ensure that we have a better alignment. But we're dealing as human with biology, and sometimes the results are not quite what we expected from in vitro, but that's all right.
We know now a lot about different animals and the milk they produce, and how that milk behaves and how it's digested and absorbed. We wanted to focus on China. So China is our biggest market for milk that we export by far. And so we decided to do work in China, and we decided to do work with elderly people in China. Now, the nature of those people, you'll hear more about this from Joanne, is that they don't have a history of milk, and so that's changing for them. And they're increasingly looking to consume more milk. And so we went into China and studied a range of things in regard to elderly and their consumption of milk. And we were particularly interested in why they consume milk, what form of milk did they consume, and so on.
In China, the dairy industry is very new. So back in the 1940s, for example, Chinese only ate 0.5 kilogram of milk a year. Now they consume 43 kilograms of milk a year, but that's still only a third of other countries on average. But it's really nutritious. And so for Chinese older adults, it's a good source of nutrition. So that's why we focused on them. We did a big study over in China with 1,000 older adults and asked them how they consume milk. And what we discovered was that they generally just drink it in the morning at breakfast. We also looked at their habits in terms of what drives them to purchase products. And in China, the most fast-growing product for Chinese older adults is milk, powdered milk mainly. But we found over 200 products just targeted at the elderly. And we asked them to choose in a simulation from a set of 8 commercial products, what would they choose for themselves and what would they choose for gifting? Because interestingly, in China, milk is given as a gift because food is important to their culture. And so we asked them what drove those decisions. And we found that most of the time, half of the time people went for a domestic brand and half of the time they went for an international brand. So it's good for New Zealand. What we need to try and understand is how people consume milk in the diet. And as we found with the Chinese older adults, they consume that with either cereal or bread, for example. And that's going to impact how they perceive the milk and also affect its nutritional value in the stomach, for example, to absorb nutrients. Once we've got all that information, I think then the New Zealand dairy industry has a whole set of recommendations that they can use to add value to the milk that they're selling over in China.